We're in AP Lit, and we're looking at two poems today for a practicing comparing two poems. So guys, let me get this out. All right. So here we go. In the two poems below, imagine that it's the day of the exam, and you have this. One of your three essays is this. In the two poems below, Keats and Longfellow reflect on similar concerns. Read the poems carefully, then write an essay in which you compare and contrast the two poems, analyzing the poetic techniques each writer uses to explore his particular situation. So let's just look at the prompt. They wouldn't give you, I like the expression, apples and oranges, you know what that means. You can't compare apples. They can't give you two things that have nothing in common. So you know from the beginning that these two poems share something, and it's probably the topic, the theme. All right, so they're similar concerns. Then it says, read the poems carefully, write an essay which you compare. That's usually taken as how are they alike, how are they different. Analyzing the poetic techniques each author uses, that's just a given. You're going to have to be able to talk about those different kinds of techniques to explore his situation. So the situations are similar but also different, and you're going to point that out. The first one is Keats. Before you do anything with it, you know about Keats. What do you know about him that might help you read the poem and look at the poet? So tell me what, just looking at the poem, looking at the author, looking at his dates, what information can you glean already without reading the poem, before you read the poem? There's plenty you already know. You brought to this moment. Tell me what they are. Don't make a mistake and look at me, because I might call on you. So nobody's gonna look at me. Everybody's in the same situation. Liam, get us started. What do you know about Keats? What do you know about this poem by just looking at it before you? I mean, we're talking about things that you'll have like 2 or 3 seconds to do. It's like in sports, you practice it in slow motion, but when it happens, it's happening real fast. So we're doing it in slow motion right now.
Just by looking at like the first 2 poems even, it seems it might be about him because he's a writer and it's talking about, or at least it's about a writer, which could possibly be him because it's talking about his pen and how the idea of coming up was built.
Okay, but even before you read the first 2 lines, what did you determine?
Well, it says that John Keats was 1795 to 1821, and then Longfellow was 1807 to 1882. So their lives were different, like the span of.
And what span do we call that? What period do we call that? We spent like a month about that. In fact, all first semester, we pretty much talked about this particular movement. And we have a book that has all, tell me again?
Romantic.
They're romantic. So in your head, you should be, okay, romantic. Nature, emotions, all that stuff should be swimming around in your head. That's one thing to go with. Keats, what did Keats like to write? Can you remember anything he wrote? We read 2 poems, not a lot, but both of them were of the same kind. Did you have
The Tiger?
Oh, that was Blake, but he was a romantic. Yeah.
Was one of them all like 2 of them?
So he liked to write odes. Odes are always serious. So you see, all these things should sort of kick in. They're always serious. Now, this is what kind of poem? Don't read it, just tell me.
Sonnet.
It's a sonnet. Look at it. You don't have to count the lines to know that it's probably a sonnet. It looks like a box and so forth. And what does the knowledge of sonnets help you anticipate? Yes.
Sonnets have like a format, like question and answer, problem, solution.
Exactly. To me, that's the best feature of sonnets and studying one is, you've got a problem and a solution. So you're going to be anticipating those. Now, we didn't do anything with Wordsworth. We can now. He's a romantic in America. And he was America's most famous poet for a long time. He was like the top of he's not anymore. He's kind of been lowered in people's estimation of him. What does it look like? Does it look like, it looks to me like a sonnet. And again, both of those, you just make these almost split-second thoughts go in your head to anticipate. So let's read the first one. I can have one of you read it. And you know, you have two choices. You can read them both and then analyze them both. You still got to do one at a time, but do you read the first one and analyze it, then read the second one and analyze it? We'll do it that way, but you can make that choice. So, Marie, would you read When I Have Fears?
When I have fears. When I have fears that I may cease to be before my pen has gleamed my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. When I behold upon the night's starred face, hue cloudy symbols of high romance, and think I that I might, or that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone, and think till love and fame to nothingness do sink.
And I'm going to make a wild generalization that I think is actually, most generalizations are true, right, at some point, that most poems seem to be organized by lines of four, and it's particularly sonnets. So you can already divide the poem before you analyze it into the first four, the second four, the third four, and the last two, because it seems to be what kind of sonnet is that? You have 3 quatrains and a rhymed couplet. You remember what we call those? Shakespeare liked to write them, so we call them Shakespearean, Elizabethan, or English sonnets. But that helps you analyze it. 4, 4, 4, 3. In this case, it's 3.5 and 2.5. You notice how the poem ends. So that gives you some idea. I would suggest the first thing you do is take a pencil, and again, you're going to have to do a lot of this quickly, but for today, see what you come up with. You're looking for what is he talking about, and how does he say it. So what are the techniques you notice? What is the point he's trying to make? Do that for that first sonnet, and just take a few minutes. We're not going to spend a long time because there is an element of speed that we have to develop. All right, anybody wanna start? You know, we have a lot to cover. You know, you're asked to understand what the problem is, what the theme is, and what his solution to it is, and how he articulates that. What are the devices he used to articulate? You got something, Elon?
Sure. Well, like, the poem starts with him talking about, like, he's scared of dying without finishing his work, like, without finishing everything he wants to write
Yeah.
down, because he has so many ideas in his brain,
Yeah.
but he doesn't have time to get it all out. And then after the first 4 lines, it goes into how he's scared about dying without loving someone or something, before, like, without, you know, making a connection with someone. And that continues almost to the end, and then the last 2 lines are about, like, how he feels when he's thinking these things,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I assume the numbers next, like, the years next to his name are his lifespan,
Mm-hmm.
which,
What, 20?
yeah, he died at 26.
Yeah.
So I guess he might have actually died before he could write everything down, or died.
Remember, you may not have been here when we did it, but he was gonna be the next Shakespeare. People thought that highly of him. It didn't happen just because of that. You know, life was cut short.
I don't know when this poem was written.
Yeah, I don't either, but, I mean, think about it. A young teenager maybe, he only had about 10 or 12 years at most, whenever he started writing, to write. What you've done, you notice what he's done, I like to kind of label, you've talked about the structure, which is a literary, I mean, that's a literary device, that's something that should be included in that. So, 4, 4, 3.5, 4, and 2. What else can you add to? I don't want to add anything, let you do that. Clayton, what do you think? What else that he talked about, sort of the structure of the poem?
Well, I guess like it kind of has like a mystical feel to it because like he uses like words like creature and like magic hand and chance and like fairy power. So I guess just kind of helps
Well,
to.
when you say mystical and when you mention magic, what comment did we make at the beginning, knowing what kind of writer he is, what era he's in? What do those things fit into?
The romantic.
Right, it's a very romantic poem, he uses the word romantic, but there is a romantic feel, I like the word mystical, sort of spiritual, ethereal, whatever word you wanna use, yeah.
I feel like, as far as the speaker goes, it says when I have fears, so it could be like, kind of like him being the speaker, or it could be a general idea of who it is.
Sure.
But I think you really get an idea of who the speaker is because he is talking about cloudy symbols of high romance, and he was a romantic poet, so I just, and what he said with the creatures and the magic hands. So I feel like it gives you more of an idea that it's him as far
Right.
as the speaker goes, instead of just like the general.
It's personal, and we know his background, he does die early, yeah, I guess he doesn't know that when he, other literary devices that he uses. Well, you have to include imagery, which is what, we haven't used that word, but we've actually talked about it, yeah.
I just saw a contrast between the first and last line.
Uh-huh.
He says, or the first line, he thinks, or he's afraid of himself ceasing to be, but then in the last line, love and fame sink into nothingness. And so I think maybe, like by this, he's trying to show that if you let your fears like have such a hold on you, then they really may come true. Like, cause the love and fame he was seeking after, turned to nothingness.
And, yeah, very good, and death will do that. Think about if you're really famous, and, I always think about if you're not famous, and then you die like Chaucer, and then they publish your Canterbury Tales, and you never saw your Canterbury, your masterpiece, your magnus opus, you know, that you never see it, and then 70 years after you've been dead, you know, this thing comes out and people are lauding is one of the great things. But what if you are famous and you're young and you're faced with death? You're like, I'm gonna lose it. I enjoy being famous. I don't know why anybody would, but you know, he seems to enjoy being famous, and he was. And that's gonna come to an end. His love, he won't be able to love her anymore. Think of all the things that he'll lose when he dies. And look,
I really like Murray's perspective, and I think it's interesting because the way that I saw the last 2 lines being written
Is the ending, that'd be another thing for you to answer, is the ending positive, negative, or neutral? I saw it this time as very negative. You're just saying, whatever. Okay, did you say que sera, sera?
Yeah.
You use actually that. Good. Yes, sir.
I like the idea of him, like, when it says, when I behold upon the night star face, like, the idea of him looking up at the sky and thinking about, like, past famous writers and wanting to live up to what they were. I thought that was
Oh.
interesting, how he would phrase that.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think he used some sort of higher diction when he says teeming brain
Sure.
and like unreflecting love. And he says a wide world, so that just gives you a really big picture of how big that world is. He could have just said world, but he's saying that there's just so much more out there, and I feel like
Yeah.
that adds to it.
Go back just a minute, go to the end of the weeds. You don't have a lot of time, that's why you've got to train yourself to see these things, you know, the weeds. Big pictures we're better at than the weeds. A couple of devices, when, and when. What do we call that? That's a device. What? Call it that. You're trying to impress the readers. And if you use the term anaphora, are you showing off? Yeah, you're showing off. Show off. Let them know. I know what I'm talking about. This is anaphora. It structures the poem. Every one of the quatrains starts with the word when. Secondly, let's go back to imagery. The first two stanzas. What kind of imagery? Take the first stanza. What kind? When I say what kind, it's not a fancy Latin word. It's simply the images in that first stanza. There's a theme in the imagery. What is the imagery? Yeah, Colin.
Well, I was thinking like nature, and like, I don't know why, I think like kudzu vine, you know how like it just goes all over everywhere, it's like teeming all the ways, you have to glean through it. I don't know.
Yeah, what are those three words? Gleaned, garnered, and ripened. What do they have in common? What?
Kind of like growing and then harvesting.
The harvesting. Isn't that perfect for what he's harvesting his brain? That sounds terrible. Sounds like a science fiction movie. We harvest brains at this operation. But that's what he's doing. That's what we mean. What kind of imagery? All three of those words deal with the same specific kind of imagery of harvesting a field and garnering, collecting it, and before he's had a chance to really do all that, before he's had a chance to glean and harvest. What about the second 4 lines? What is the imagery connection there? We sort of kind of said it earlier, but night starred face, high clouds, huge clouds, high romance, magic hands. Clayton pointed out these are also nature imagery, and romantic in the sense that they have that ethereal, what do we say, spiritual quality to it. And with the magic, that's and chance. That's all deals with kind of the supernatural. Also, romantic images. And then fairy power. But you see, all the images, knowing that he's romantic, you could link directly to what romantic writers like to write about. Supernatural, nature, death. That's a romantic thing. Remember Emmeline Grangerford, she did it badly. Keats does not do it badly. Well, I don't know how much time we just spent on that, more time than you would have, but you've got to condense that a little bit, or a lot, into a few minutes to be able to spot specific imagery, anaphora, structure, theme, and what's he trying to get at. He really is going to regret dying. He does not want to die. And he's going to miss this, and this. All right, now you're just halfway done before you can even put pencil to paper, which is what we're going to do next week for a different poem. We need somebody to read knowing that. Okay, thank you, McKinley. Mezzo cammin, I'll tell you what that means when it's over, right? But notice, written at Bob Byrd, that's part of the title. So you got to pay attention to that when you read it. Would you include that? And then we already talked about Longfellow, an American, but also romantic. So notice it's on the Rhine. So he's an American, he's in Germany, just before leaving for home. Okay, that may be significant, oh, it would be, because he put it in the title, so, please.
Half of my life is gone, and I have let the years slip from me, and have not fulfilled the aspiration of my youth, to build some tower of song with lofty parapet. Not indolence, nor pleasure, nor the fret of restless passions that would not be stilled, but sorrow and a care that almost killed, kept me from what I may accomplish yet. Though, halfway up to the hill, I see the past lying beneath me with its sounds and sights, the city in the twilight dim and vast, with smoking roofs, soft bells, and gleaming lights. And here above me on the autumnal blast, the cataract of death, far thundering from the heights.
And just to help, thank you, just to help you a little bit, I would automatically just draw lines after 4 lines. So it narrows the poem to 4, 4, 4. And each one of those represents basically a sentence. So if you do that, that sort of helps you narrow your analysis, organizing it. See what you can, by the way, mezzo cammin are also the first words of Dante's Inferno. Halfway, my life is gone. So if you knew that, you could connect it with the poem about death, which Dante wrote. And he starts half with my life. That's just a Latin word, or maybe Italian, actually. Let's see what you can do with it. Take a few minutes. Now, of course, you're thinking about the other poem. So you've got to keep connecting what did you see here to the other one. Hope as you're finishing this, I'll give you 4 more minutes, now you've got to be making those connections. How is this like the other poem? How is it different from the other poem? And what do they have in common? I mean, like subject-wise, what's the orange to orange thing that they share? All right, as you finish it up, what I want you to answer now is not just what you see in the second poem, but how the second poem reflects or differs from the first one. Yeah, Courtney.
So, the first 4 lines, it seems like he's saying half of his life is gone and he hasn't, like, he hasn't fulfilled his purpose or, like, done what he wanted to do. And the first 4 lines of the first poem are, like, talking about how he's afraid that he's gonna die before he fulfills his purpose. So it's like a similar fear, but this one's coming from a much younger person, or the first one is. And the second one, the guy's.
That's a good difference, similarity. Anything else?
And then he starts talking about, like, the younger guy in the first poem was talking about how he hoped, or he was worried he was gonna die before he got to have a romance and do all of that stuff. And, Longfellow is saying he didn't not do what he wanted to do because he was having a romance or doing something fun and exciting, but because he was worrying about stuff. So it's kind of like, if this guy had gotten to live that long, maybe one of the things he would have thought about was, wow, I spent so much time worrying that I was gonna die instead of actually doing stuff.
Yeah, he doesn't identify that worry, but good point. Was Avery or whoever making it?
I think it's funny that he says that half of his life is gone when he was only 35 when he wrote this. He's like, I've wasted most of my life, but he still has like 40 years left. And
35, I think, was considered sort of literally halfway, because most people, the idea was 70 years, somewhere around there, so that's sort of a conventional way of looking at it, but you're right, that's a long time. Yeah.
I feel like this poem is a little bit like over dramatic compared to the other one. It seems kind of like he's having a sort of midlife crisis, like.
Literally.
So the first line says half of my life is gone, and then lower at the end of the poem, halfway up the hill. So it's like the hill is the metaphor for his life, so he's exactly halfway through his life. And so he's like, I'm in a crisis because I haven't completed everything that I've hoped to accomplish in my life, and death is looming above me, and when am I gonna figure it out? So he just seems like he's being really over dramatic.
I like that. I think that's a really good point. Midlife crisis. That's sort of a typical thing. What's he got to complain about, you know? But he's finding something. Yes.
So in the first one, he is talking about, like, the main theme in that is fear, and then he has fears, and then in the second one it says, but sorrow and a care that almost killed kept me from what I may accomplish yet. And I feel like the first one, since the theme is fear, I think the fear is holding us back and can make us not care because of the fear of something that may happen. And in this one it says a care that almost killed. So
Yeah, something
this
that
one,
did happen.
there's more care in it that almost killed him.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I said something similar to what Willa thought. I said how the first one seemed kind of hopeful in the end. He was like, well, I might not get to do everything that I want to, but I'm sure going to try. And
The first one.
yes, and then the second one, he's very uncertain, and he seems angry at himself, and it seems like a poem of just indignation at how little time he seems to have in his life. And he seems, like Avery said, he seems so sad. He's not letting himself hope. And I think the attitude of the authors plays a lot into.
And I like what she said about overly dramatic, you know, that's actually what people do criticize Longfellow for. That's why he's not maybe as good a poet as now considered as Keats. Yeah.
Yeah, about the dramatic thing, it's kind of like, the first one seems more of like your traditional poem, where it's like describing something, and the second one seems more like almost like a dramatic work, like Shakespeare, right, with characters, kind of like they capitalize past and death, like they're two different.
Almost like an
characters
allegory.
that he's like kind of looking at, and he's kind of in the middle of them, and they're both trying to like influence.
So good, I've never thought of that. Like an allegory, like, what's his name, Bunyan last year, you know? Didn't he do that? I mean, and you have the allegory is the hill, and you don't get that same picture in the first one. Eli.
Yeah, this one's definitely, it's definitely sadder and more like pessimistic, I think. But at the same time, it seems like he's not like completely given up, because it does say like, kept me from what I may accomplish yet. Like he starts out by saying, I haven't done it, and I know I'm like halfway through like my life, like I'm only gonna have so much time left, and he's like acknowledging death. But I think he's not like given up or anything. He
Second one?
seems to, what?
You're talking about the second one?
Yeah, the second one. He seems like he's still, like, he's gonna do what he can to like not make the same mistakes he
Yeah.
did in his first half of his life. And the last line, it says, cataract of death far thundering from the heights, which might sort of make him, like, he might be seeing death as sort of far away still, like he has some time before he's gonna get there.
Yeah, so that's a little more hopeful.
Yeah.
Sort of the opposite of maybe Emily thought that the other, that's interesting. Yes. Why don't we go with Avery first?
I really like the contrast of him saying he sees the past, and then at the end, when Eli's talking about the cataract of death, it says he hears the cataract.
Talk about
of death.
imagery.
Because
Here,
cataracts
see.
make you blind, so I think it's saying like, he doesn't know when death is gonna come. So it's like, he sees that his past is over, but he's unsure about when death is gonna
Well,
come.
I think you're right. There's an element of maybe blindness here, but what is the second cataract? There's another meaning of cataract. You know what that is? It actually is a waterfall.
You're so smart.
But I don't think, what do you get with poetry? You get two for the price of one. So I think it's legitimate to think, but it could possibly also kind of refer to this other thing, yeah.
Also going off of him being like dramatic about this whole thing, I think it's kind of interesting that he's talking about all the stuff that he needs to do and stuff that he wants to do, but instead of actually doing it, he decides to sit down and write a poem about how he needs to do it.
Well,
Yes.
and you could interpret what he wants to build, his poetry, that is his building, that is his work. But, yeah, work.
I thought it was interesting when they were talking about the stuff that they wanted to do. Keats says he has like all these things in his head that he wants to get out, but Longfellow was like talking about how he wants to build something, like he wants to create something, but he doesn't really say, oh, I have a ton of stuff that I want to share with the world. He's more like, I want to have created this really
So
big thing.
you're really talking about the different kind of imagery. So that first imagery was, we already said, it's natural, it's a harvest imagery, things that are there he wants to harvest. The second kind of imagery is more, you said building imagery. It's like building a medieval castle, parapet, tower, which is just as romantic as nature, right? The Romantics like the medieval era too. So that's what you're addressing, that would be something to point out, the different kind of imagery that Wordsworth used than Keats, yes.
I kind of thought Longfellow was a little more optimistic, because when I look at Keats' poem, he's focusing more on what he's losing, whereas with Longfellow, he looks at both his past and his future. So
Yeah.
he just looked back and acknowledged the things he had gone through, which Keats didn't do. And also, Keats ended his poem by saying he's on the shore of the wide world all alone, and the things he sought after sink to nothingness, whereas Longfellow says he might yet accomplish what he would dream to.
And just by drawing my attention to the last line, what are the last three lines of Keats? Nothingness do sink. What is the last word of Longfellow? Heights. So to me, that sort of reinforces the idea that at least Wordsworth is looking up. Longfellow is looking up. So it made me think he halfway through, he feels like he's still got half of his life, where Keats seems to have given up. This thought has just sort of caused everything to sink and die. Yeah.
I think, well, first of all, comparing the two authors and their writing styles, it kind of reminds me of something that we talked about in Latin, Homer versus Virgil, and how Virgil set out to try to write a great epic that would be the one for the nation.
Virgil.
Yes. But because Homer, he set out to just tell a story that he thought might be entertaining, and he ended up writing or telling the Odyssey, which was like the story for the nation. And then that kind of reminds me of Walden, where he was talking about philosophers versus hunters and how you could find
yeah,
He's
without
not
it.
trying to control everything.
Yeah, it seems like things are sinking away rather than following this apocalyptic ending of your life, this cataclysmic waterfall of death, as opposed to just sinking away. That may be more peaceful. Well, I'm gonna have to tell Mr. Sullivan, we've compared Keats and Longfellow to Homer and Virgil. He would be honored to hear that. Can I just, I don't know how I would work this in, but
He's maintained that Homer and Virgil are both better.
they are. I don't think anybody would, I don't think anybody would disagree with it. Look at that last image. This is just something I love about the poem. Listen to this. Lying beneath me with its sounds and sights, a city in twilight dim, vast, smoking roofs, soft bells, gleaming lights. To me, that looks like a Christmas card. And to me, it just describes perfectly how we often look at the past. We look at it, oh, remember when I was in the third grade, and the soft glowing lights of the Christmas tree, and everything was just wonderful. And, we kind of romanticize, which is what he's doing, but he romanticizes the past and the future. He goes from the soft romantic to the thundering romantic. I love that contrast from that Christmas card to the cataract of death that he's waiting to meet. Yeah.
That makes me think of a scene from The Giver that we read in middle school. It was from the past, and he saw it, and it was like this cabin in like a snowy wood, and it was Christmas time, and it's something that they didn't experience in the communities that they were in because of sameness, and I thought that was
Wow. We have about 3 minutes. It's one thing we haven't done. We're not going to. You knew that at the beginning. But now, your job would still be, hypothetically, to write the paper. Any suggestions of how you would organize such a paper? Because we're going to do that next week. How do you organize two things? You're going to have to talk about two poems, what they are similar, how they're different. Do you have any suggestion how you would organize that paper? Because I know it used to bother me above all things. I had to write a paper. It was the structure. How do I organize? And I was trying to fit it into that 3 points, that 5 paragraph in college, and I realized, it took years to realize that's not the only form you can use. But, well, let me just suggest, you have really two choices. You can talk about, like we did, this poem, discuss it, and then show how this poem is different. Or you can take the things that are similar between the two poems and write it in one paragraph, and the things that are different in the two poems and write it in the other. So, are you worried about 3 paragraphs? I just sounded like I just used 2. That'd be fine. They're not going to take off of that. But really, those are the two choices. Really, can you think of a third choice when you're trying to compare and contrast? Either one poem, then the other, or compare and contrast both poems at the same time. And all these have to be done within, say, 5 or 10 minutes, these decisions. Next week's poems are equally interesting, and I'll look forward to see what you come up. Good job with that. Please read for tomorrow, and we'll see you then. And we got that classical discussion video. We made all these connections.